Hello, friends and neighbors. I'm Andy, and welcome to part 2 to my Let's Try Coding Conway's Game of Life. So this is just going to sort of be a little bit of a look at my personal setup, with a strong note that your system will likely not look much like this at all. I am in Arch Linux, which is a choice I once upon a time would have actually recommended quite heartily, for reasons that I won't get into too much detail on right now because of systemd being an ubiquitous presence in Linux right now. I think a lot of the selling points of Arch Linux don't exist anymore. So I don't think there's a very good reason to choose it as a Linux distribution if you're in the process of making a decision on which one you'd like to try. I would recommend Ubuntu or Debian because of the Debian repository interface, apt-get. I've used apt-based systems quite extensively in my own personal history with Linux, and so I know how to use those pretty well, and it's pretty intuitive, and I know that Ubuntu in recent years has developed some fairly extensive graphical interface versions, so I'm pretty sure you can manage all of the packages you'll need on your system in Ubuntu without ever having to get really intimate with the command line, if that's a turnoff for you. Debian is sort of the where apt comes from. Ubuntu sort of started out as a Debian branch, and Debian is what I used for the most part before settling down in Arch. If you don't want to use an apt system for any reason, I know Fedora, the sort of non-enterprise version of Red Hat these days, exists, and I don't know much more about it than that. It uses the Red Hat Package Manager, which has an interface called Yum that I know almost nothing about. And I believe it also defaults to KDE instead of GNOME, which I don't like either of them. Those are user interfaces that sort of come out of a box in much a similar way to all of the features you get in a new Windows PC, for example. And if it's between the two, I would pick GNOME, but I know there are people out there who do enjoy KDE. I don't personally like either of them, and there are a few alternatives. There's XFCE and whatnot, but there's so many choices out there, and I am not a good authority to really help you make your decision, so I recommend doing a bit of a search on your own. Anyway, what we're looking at here in the upper left-hand corner is my terminal. So this is running a shell called Z shell, but Bash is probably the most typical shell that you'll see, and what I really recommend getting yourself familiar with. The only reason I'm using Z shell is because the Arch Linux boot disk defaults to the Z shell, and if I'm ever in a situation where I need to mount my root directory from the boot disk, if Z shell isn't there, it causes problems. So I use it reluctantly. Everything I know about Bash works perfectly fine in Z shell, and it actually has one feature that I enjoy very much, which is if you use tab completion, for example, there it will actually give you a list of, and there's no one thing that the tab completion can end in. It'll actually give you a list of options for what you might possibly be looking for, like you can see up there right now. Instead of giving you the terminal bell, if you're the kind of person who doesn't mute the terminal bell. So I think that's really cool. And so that's basically the only one feature of Z shell I ever personally take advantage of. But nonetheless, Bash is the most used shell, I believe. There are some people out there who use C shell. I don't know any of them. So if there is a secret C shell majority out there, I am unaware of it. So Bash is sort of the tool that I would recommend getting familiar with. And also, an editor is another tool that we're going to need. So I'm just going to go ahead and go into the folder I have set up with what I've been messing around with for our Conway's Game of Life thing. I'm not going to get into any code right now, but I will go ahead and show you my Emacs window here. Emacs is probably a bad choice, but I'm going to use it because it is what I am very much used to. And I don't think I'm comfortable at this point choosing a different editing environment, given I am not even sure if anyone's going to watch these. So I'm just going to stick with what I know. My Emacs here for sure is running some customization in my Emacs configuration file, and at one point was running some custom Emacs Lisp, but I'm pretty sure all of that's gone because I was too lazy to maintain it between version updates. So this isn't what Emacs looks like fresh out of the box. Fresh out of the box, it looks quite terrible, but if you put some time and effort into editing your configuration files, you can make it look exactly how you want it, which is essentially what I've done here. So whatever you pick, I highly recommend you pick something with syntax highlighting, which is what gives me the different colors for all of these various things. You can see my comments are in sort of this orangey color, and various other keywords are in blue. Variable names and other characters are in light gray. Where I declare variables, it's sort of this pale yellow. And I very much enjoy light gray on dark gray. I believe that is the most readable thing, which is likely a source of controversy, but that's what's going to be on my screen whenever we're working on these things. And so another potential point of confusion that I would like to clear up in case this causes issues for anyone is the way Python development has worked out. For example, yeah, okay, so as you can see here, I've just queried my Python 2 package, which is sort of a critical thing, and I checked the other distributions I mentioned, Ubuntu, Debian, and I actually looked it up on Fedora as well. So all of those still have Python 2 in the main Python branch. So if you install Python, you'll be getting Python version 2.7 point something. I didn't bother to record exactly which version of Python 2 you're going to be seeing in any of those distributions, but they all have Python 2 in the main branch, which is the version of Python we're going to need. Arch Linux, where I'm living, has Python 3 already living in the main Python branch, and if you want to be using Python version 2.7, you have to make sure you install Python 2. So depending on what distribution you choose will determine which version of Python you pull in. And it appears that for the stable version of Ubuntu, Debian, and Fedora, Python 2 will be what you get if you simply install the Python package with apt-get or yum. So the reason we need to make sure we get Python 2 is because Pygame, one of the libraries we're using, is based off of Python 2 and doesn't have Python 3 support as of yet. SciTE has very recently released a Python 3 version, but to make sure everything works across the board, we want to make sure we're in Python 2.7. Python 3 has made some interesting sort of fundamental changes, which I personally agree with. I think they're very good design choices. So one thing I'll go ahead and demonstrate here is with IPython 2, which is another tool that I will not say is a requirement for following along, but I find extremely useful, which is interactive Python. And I can show you some of the cool features there, one of which in particular, you can use these so-called magic words with the % and run, for example, to run a script, which, for example, let's go ahead and run my game of life here. So this doesn't look too pretty yet, but you can sort of go ahead and see that runs, and while that's running, we still have access to the Python interpreter, except the way it works, it's actually taking up the attention of the interpreter, so we can't actually put anything in while that's up on screen. But now, for example, all of the variables and things, the functions and whatnot that were declared in that script exist in this interactive terminal, so I can use them manually. So that's very cool, and also lets me do things like get the doc strings for functions for various libraries right there from that interactive terminal. So that's pretty cool. I recommend IPython if that's something that is of particular interest to you, having that capacity to get that documentation instantaneously without having to go to the website or whatnot, right from the very screen where you're running your code and playing around with it in sort of your interactive sandbox. And also being able to get your script loaded into memory like that is a very nice feature, which I don't know if that will be of remarkable use to us in this particular project, but in general, it's a feature that I've made extensive use of. And to sort of show you one of the critical changes that makes a lot of Python 2 libraries not work with Python 3 is just to use sort of the quintessential hello world example. So this works fine in Python 2, but is fairly different from the way most functions work in Python. So in Python 3, print works much more like a function, and so requires parentheses, and so it'll be written like this, which works fine here in sort of this Python 2.7 kind of bridge between Python 2 and Python 3. But this is what your code is going to have to look like in Python 3. So I hope I didn't go too long here. We'll see how it turns out in editing. And next episode, I'm gonna dive right into some code. So thanks for joining me, and until then, I wish you the best.